gather every Sunday. So over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Dave. Kids, you're doing exceptionally well. I don't think any of my kids would have been as patient as you've been this morning. Can you get Mark 14 open with me? Obviously, we're in this lead up to the most momentous event in all history, that very first Easter Sunday. I just want to backtrack a little bit and look at what happened just before. Thank you. I'm going to start with a question, though. What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought? Maybe it's the house, or a fancy new car, or a really nice item of jewellery, or something like that. Or maybe you're the kind of person that loves spending money on technology. You've got a really massive telly. It's all connected to the internet. Do you know, whenever I've had to spend money on something big, I always get this little, gulp moment. You know, it's kind of like, oh, crumbs, have I really got to spend that much? Even I ask myself the question, do I really need it? You know, and that kind of sometimes acts as a filter to whether I actually spend it or not. Because whenever we spend a lot of money, there's always a measure of uncertainty and risk, isn't there? That's true for me, especially with second-hand cars, actually. I once saw this blue Volvo, and it was on the side of the road, and it was a few years newer than the Volvo that we were driving as a family. And it had a walnut dash as well. And I thought, oh, that's nicer and newer and lower mileage than our Volvo. And so I called the number in the window, and I ended up buying this car for a really, really cheap price. And at exactly the same time, we had a family in the church whose car was written off. So I said, well, that's perfect timing. Look, our old Volvo, it's done like 300,000 miles, but it's still going. So if you want it, just have it. And so we were able to give this car to them, and we had this new swanky blue Volvo. I felt great until we were on our way to West Point. And I was towing the caravan, and we had 7 of our family in the car. And then at the last minute, one of the guys at church said, oh, can you pick up some tables from the church office? And, oh, can you bring the barbecue as well? And there was this whole list of things that I needed to pick up. So there was me driving, 7 of us in the car, plus the caravan, plus half the contents of the church office. And, of course, as soon as I hit those Devon Hills, I hear this hissing sound. Steam coming out, the head gasket blown. In fact, that car never made it back from Exeter. It's buried somewhere in a church graveyard somewhere there. And in fact, we had to fork out. We had to sell the caravan to buy another car. Ironically, the older car that we'd given away went on for about 3 or 4 more years. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It's ridiculous. Whenever you spend money, there's always a risk. Mark 14. Jesus is on his way to the cross. He's trying to help his disciples understand the cost of his mission, both to them and to himself. He's been teaching them what's going to happen at the end of history, that they'll hear wars and rumours of wars, and that the earth will go through labour pains and they'll suffer, but the gospel will go out to the nations, and he, as the Son of Man, will return with great power and glory. And he reminds his disciples that no one knows when that's going to happen, so to be alert and to keep watch and to live every day as if it could be happening tomorrow. And into that context of that big cosmic story, Mark 14 draws us into a very intimate moment. And so let's just look at the first 11 verses. I'm going to rattle through this morning, okay? Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. Leave her alone, Jesus said. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them any time you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." And then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. In Mark 14, I want to point out 4 things that get broken. Usually when things get broken, it's bad news, isn't it? Usually when something gets broken, it's like, oh. But the 4 things that get broken here are all good things. So here we are. Passover was a couple of days away. Remember, the Passover was the time that they remembered God's saving covenant act when they would put the blood of the lamb over the doorposts so that the angel of death would pass by. And here we've got this moment when the chief priests and the scribes are scheming. They're scheming and they're setting the scene for what Judas is going to go on to do. And in that moment, Jesus is there in Bethany at Simon the leper's house. Simon is probably someone who Jesus had healed, and they most likely are still in Bethany because to go to Jerusalem at the time of the Passover would have been a little bit chaotic. It would be a bit like trying to get to central London on New Year's Eve. It wouldn't be a good move. It would be packed and busy. And so they're there in Bethany, and we see this woman do this extraordinary thing. Now, John's Gospel tells us that it was possibly Mary, Martha and Lazarus' sister. Only John says that. And there are some other similar parallel kind of anointing stories in the Gospels. But the thing we need to understand here is Jesus is there, he's reclining, and this woman gets this alabaster jar, breaks it, pours the perfume onto Jesus' head. I mean, culturally even, this was a very odd thing to do. And for her as a woman particularly to do it would be very unusual, not very PC. Even if she was known to Jesus, it would be a very odd thing to do. And then you see the totality of her breaking of the jar. I mean, she didn't pour out a little bit and then put the cork back in. She smashed the whole thing in an irreversible moment. And you have to ask the question, where did she get it from? I mean, women didn't have access to loads of money. She wouldn't have had a job. So what does this thing represent? Well, possibly it could have been a family heirloom. It could have been something that had been saved up over years. Something that was very costly. It could be her pension. It could be an investment for their future. Whatever it is, it's something of ridiculous worth to break and use in a moment. Especially so totally and so irreversibly. Quite literally what she's doing is she is laying down the thing that to her is of most value. The thing that would bring most security for her and for her family. And that's the cost of worship. You see, this first broken thing represents total worship. Total worship. And it's a challenging example. And it makes us ask some really difficult questions. Actually, for those of you who might not yet be Christians, it forces us to ask the question, well, who was this man that she was willing to give up everything that she had? She must have seen something in this man, Jesus, that said it was worth losing everything that she thought was of value in order to do this act. So we have to ask, who was he? For those of us that are Christians already, it forces us to ask a different question. Are we willing? Are we willing to give up our possessions, our material wealth, in order to offer things as an act of worship? Are we willing to give up the things that we put our security in? Are we willing to give up everything if necessary? You see, the disciples here, they hadn't fully grasped, and it must have driven Jesus mad, I think. They hadn't really fully grasped who he was and what was going to happen. And so they looked at the extravagance of this woman and they rebuked her. Oh, come on, that's worth a lot. We could have sold that and cared for the poor. Which, of course, is true. Jesus wasn't saying that it's wrong to care for the poor. But they missed the significance of what this woman did, you see. They missed the greater sacrifice. And so Jesus explains it to them and says, no, you need to understand. She was preparing me for burial. Now in Judah, everyone who was anointed a king would have been anointed with oil, usually by a prophet. And Jesus is here being anointed for his kingly role. This was a symbolic preparation of what was going to happen to him through the cross and through his resurrection and his eternal kingship. You see, the disciples had consistently failed to understand, but what we see here is that this woman understood. She understood. And that's why Mark records and says, now anywhere where the gospel is preached, this woman will be remembered too, because she was perhaps the first one to really understand who Jesus was and what he had come to do. And so she was willing to lay down everything in order to anoint him and embrace him as king. Judas was the polar opposite, of course. Instead of sacrificing everything for Jesus, he sacrificed Jesus for everything. All he wanted was money. You know Jesus' teaching on money? You can't serve two masters. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. You can't love both God and money. And that was Judas's downfall. He loved money more than he loved Jesus. And it's been the downfall of many a good person since, thinking that material things are going to give us what we need. They're going to give us the status or the peace or the security. Now, there's only one place we go to for status, peace and security, and that's Jesus. But mankind's greatest folly is to think that these short-term material things are going to give us what we need. We can't. So the question, I guess, is what are you going to break? What's the extravagant thing that you're going to sacrifice as an act of worship? Do you know, I remember some time ago, I was preaching in Southampton and we were raising some funds for a building project. And I came across that example in the Old Testament where they were giving gifts for the temple. And it's interesting because it says that some of them bought stones, gemstones and jewellery, items of jewellery and silver and gold. And I thought, isn't that funny? There's a really good example of people giving up their valuable things there, but we never do that. We just kind of do bank transfers. So I said to the church, if you've got stuff that you're sitting on that you don't want to use it, you don't use anymore, why not just bring that and we'll sell it and put it in the building fund? And do you know what? The next week, somebody came with a bag of jewellery. And then she took her wedding ring off. She'd lived under an abusive husband for many years, but she kept the ring for some reason. She said, this is a way for me to redeem it. She took the ring off and gave it to me. Another woman came with a gold bracelet, hundreds of pounds of gold. She said, I've never worn it. She said, it was given to me for a birthday years ago. I had a watch that somebody had given me that was way too posh for me. I never used to wear it because I was nervous of scratching it. And I thought, it just sits in my my bedside table. What is the point of having that? And so I just sold it on the internet. And do you know what? We raised so much money through doing that. I wonder if you've just got things. You've got things that are of value that could be put to work. That's not really what I'm preaching on. I'm preaching on worship. But, you know, our heart is, worship is a sacrifice. That's what this woman teaches us. Last three things very quickly that are broken in Mark 14. Just going to read from verse 12. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations for the Passover? So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house, he enters. The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He'll show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. The disciples left, went into the city, found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. When the evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me, one who's eating with me. They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, surely not I. It is one of the 12, he replied, one who dips his bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it's written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he'd not been born. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." And then he took the cup and gave thanks and offered it to them. And they drank from it. "This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "I tell you the truth, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink of it anew in the kingdom of heaven." And when they'd sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So where the woman had broken the jar as an act of total worship, something else gets broken in this scene. Jesus takes the bread and he breaks it. So he makes this announcement that there's a traitor among them. There's a traitor around the table. I think BBC have got a TV series, haven't they? Traitors, where they try and find out who the guilty one is. And they're all sat there trying to work out who the guilty one is. Is it me? Have I made a mistake? Am I going to do it and I don't know it yet? There must have been some confusion. They might have thought that they'd done it by accident or something like that. But, I wonder how Judas was feeling. I bet he had sweaty palms. He must have been feeling awful, mustn't he? You can imagine nervous twitches. I wonder if he could even make eye contact with Jesus as he realizes what's going on. And then in verses 22 to 25, Jesus again tries to communicate visually what is going to happen to him. And he establishes a connection between the broken bread and his broken body. Bear in mind at this moment he's very much still in his body, he's still very much alive. So he draws this parallel between the bread and the body and the wine and his blood. And so just as that jar had been broken as an act of total worship, now he's pointing to the fact that his body will be broken as an act of total sacrifice. Total sacrifice. He was going to lay down his physical body in a covenant establishing once and for all atonement act. See, every other sacrifice had only been temporary. We know that. All the Old Testament sacrifices had only been temporary and limited in effectiveness. They were never going to make a salvation path for every single one of us. But here we see a total sacrifice. And instead of that temporary partial sacrifice of a lamb or of a goat for sin, what we've got here is the saving act of God centered on Jesus, his body physically being broken so that you and I can stand. So that you and I can come before a holy God with clean hands and a pure heart. Because he paid the total price. See, this is a total sacrifice. Nothing else could have achieved or averted the wrath of God from you and from I. It had to be the one mediator, the God-man. It had to be him, and it had to be that way. Him laying down his life in an act of total sacrifice so that you and I could sit here today knowing the love of God. You see, it's a total sacrifice, which means we can add nothing to it. All we can do is receive it as a gift and celebrate it and say thank you. We just can't add anything to it because it was total. Something's total, you don't need to add anything to it. The cross was enough for you and for me to receive that grace that we were talking about this morning. We've received grace upon grace. We didn't deserve it, we didn't earn it, but it's come our way as a gift. We receive it. So the woman had a broken jar signifying total worship. Jesus had a broken body signifying the total sacrifice. Let's read on, verses 32 to 36. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter and James and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." And he said to them, "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything's possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." The third thing to get broken is the will of Jesus in this garden. So he's there in Gethsemane with his disciples. This would have been a regular place that they would have gone to pray. Although when you read it, it seems like the disciples slept more than prayed. I'm sure we'd never do that, would we? Just got my eyes shut for a minute, I'm just praying. In fact, I've got a pair of socks, and on the bottom of the socks it says, I'm not sleeping, I'm praying. I've got my feet up and my eyes closed. Everybody knows what's going on. So the disciples are there with him, and even though they're nearby, in this moment, let's make no mistake, Jesus is very much alone. Jesus is very much on his own here. And it says he was deeply distressed, he was troubled, he was overwhelmed with sorrow. Jesus is approaching that moment when the deepest pain imaginable will be his. And because of the weight of that, he's physically overwhelmed. It doesn't say he knelt to pray, it said he fell to the ground. The spiritual exhaustion of carrying the weight that he was carrying made him fall physically to the ground. The immense stress of what he knew he was about to face. In Luke's account of this moment, it says that he sweated blood. Hematidrosis, when your blood vessels under the stress burst and mix with your sweat glands, and so it literally looks like you're sweating blood. Shows us here that Jesus is still very much human in this moment. He's feeling the enormity of the cross and all that's about to happen. And then he faces this battle, and it's the battle that every human being will face. He faces the great obedience battle. Basically, the Christian life is one long obedience battle. And he cries out, he says, Abba, Father, everything's possible for you. Take this cup from me. So he's basically saying, God, you know everything. You can do anything. You can find a way round this. You're the God who created everything. Come on, I know you. You're my Father. You can avoid this. You can change. I mean, how often do we pray like that? God, change everything. Find another way round. Don't let this happen to me. Don't we? So often pray like that. But then in that moment, we see his total obedience, his total submission. And he just very simply says, yet not what I will, but you will. This is Jesus willingly laying down everything in obedience to his Father's will. In fact, just as he always has done. He's always been obedient to the Father. He only ever did what the Father told him to do. But this is Jesus doing it as an act of total obedience. One commentator, Benjamin Witherington III, I love his name, he summarized it like this. On the cross, Jesus' body was physically crucified by man. But in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus willingly crucified his spirit. You see, this moment was a moment when he put himself back into the clear thinking of knowing that he had to head to the cross. And that then, from being broken and falling to the floor under the immense weight of it, meant he could stand and could find courage to set his face like flint and to head to Jerusalem. He knew, because he'd submitted his will to the Father, that now he would be able to see it through and his obedience would bring us life. He knew that the punishment that was going to be upon him would bring us peace. And he had the courage to go through with it in spite of all of his human responses. So how do we respond to that obedience? Well, I think we respond to it by doing likewise, actually. By doing all that we can to be willing to be obedient to God. And I'd even go so far as to say obedience is the path to full life and the abundant life that Jesus came to give us. You know, I remember Dave and I go back a long way. 1992, I thought this whole Christian thing was a load of rubbish. I mean, a church was irrelevant. What's Jesus got to do with anything? I was so attracted by the world. I didn't want to turn my back on all that potential fun and become all religious. But when God showed up, I had to make a choice. And it's an obedience choice. Am I going to lay down my life and do what he wants and follow him? Or am I going to carry on my own way thinking I know everything and still getting it wrong over and over again? So I made that obedience step, became a Christian, never regretted it once, forever changed. I was a school teacher. The year 2000, God spoke to me again. Said, I want you to lay down your 10 years of teaching. I know you're at the top of your career right now, but I want you to go to the bottom of a different one. I want you to become a trainee, a pastoral assistant in a church. And what do? I've got 2 kids and I've got a mortgage. But Joe and I looked at one another and we knew God was saying, you should do this. We didn't even ask whether there was a salary, actually. There was, but it wasn't much. But God met our needs. And we counted the financial cost, but I'm glad we did. In 2006, God spoke to us and said, we want you to leave your family and your friends in Winchester. We want you to relocate with your kids to a new city and start a new church. I'm thinking, really? Dave would be much better at that than me. But we knew it was right. We sat with our kids and we said, look, you know you've got a great youth group here and you've got loads of friends. How do you feel about going and starting again? Thankfully, they came. And we left a church of about 300 behind us. But now I look back 18 years later and I've just handed on a church of about 300 in Southampton. And you think, well, if we hadn't done that, you see, we had to face that obedience battle again and again and again. And again, last September, God really spoke to me about laying down my leadership of Life Church in order to pick up a broader vision to see churches planted in Southern Europe. And I'm like, oh, really? I don't even like traveling. I quite like Italian food, but that's about as far as it goes. But thought of being away every month and traveling, but again, I knew it was an obedience moment. The essence of discipleship is obedience. It's like Jesus, wedding at Cana, wine's run out, Mary gets the disciples, says, guys, do whatever he tells you to do. Yeah? That's the heart of discipleship. Jesus tells you to do something, do it. Don't argue, don't back away, don't give all the reasons why you can't, do it. And finally this. In the end of chapter 14, Jesus is heading towards the cross. Everybody's trying to find a reason to finish him off. And Jesus is like, his lips are sealed. So verse 60, then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The fourth and final thing to get broken in Mark 14 is the identity of Jesus getting broken wide open. You see, Judas betrays him. Jesus is arrested. He's there before the chief priests, the elders, the teachers of the law. They're all looking for something to pin on him, some reason to finish him off. And in that moment, Jesus reveals his true identity. Are you the Christ? I am. That Hebrew word for God. And as soon as they heard that, I am, he's saying he's God. Right, now we've got him. Blasphemy. We've got him. We've got him. See, Jesus chose to reveal himself as the great I am. And now everyone knows who he is. And the question each one of us have to ask as we approach Easter is, who do we say he is? Do we acknowledge that this man is God and therefore we're prepared to live a life of total worship, total sacrifice, total obedience? Or do we still retain that bit that says, I'm keeping it to myself. You see, the Easter story, friends, is a moment for us to reevaluate everything. And just as Jesus was totally in for this mission, he calls us to be totally in for this mission, which is why days like today are important. Because these are moments when you can say, I am in, and I am going to get behind this team, and I'm going to serve this church, and I'm going to use my gifts, and I'm going to give my offering, and I'm going to contribute to this mission that we're on together. Why? Because Jesus did everything for me. And so I want to give everything for him. Now, you'll all have different styles. You'll all have different priorities. There'll be different things that you want to do, and that's fine. We're a community. Okay? We're not cookie cutters. We're a community. And so you've got a part to play. My encouragement to you is, just as Jesus was fully in, I want you to be fully in as you take steps forward together. And I pray that you'll have a really wonderful celebration together at Easter, and you'll delight in this great resurrection. Let's pray together. Jesus, I want to thank you. And I want to say you're worthy. Just as Amber was saying earlier, you are worthy, Jesus. You're worthy of everything. Lord, if there's any resistance in us to being totally on board with you and your mission, Lord, break us. Lord, if we're hanging on to things that we put our security in, whether that's material things or relationships or whatever it might be, Jesus, would you break that? Even I pray very practically, some of us, even that story about jewelry and valuable things, that some of us might suddenly discover that we've got things that are of worldly value but of no eternal worth, and that we might be able to put our treasures ahead in heaven by giving in order to see your mission achieved, Jesus. We want to be totally giving in worship to you, Jesus. Help us to appreciate your sacrifice this Easter. Thank you that you went to the cross. You didn't back down when you had that moment in the garden. You didn't find a different route. You did well, Jesus, and we're so thankful. Thank you for going ahead of us as our forerunner, making a way for us to follow. Lord, none of us will be able to without that sacrifice. We're so thankful, Jesus, that you did. And Lord, we want to be obedient to you, just as you were obedient to the Father. Lord, if there are things you're calling people to in this church, let them be obedient to it. Do whatever he tells you. Be obedient to the will of the Father. His will is good, it's pleasing, it's perfect. And Jesus, we just finished today by recognizing who you are, the great I am. And we give our lives afresh today, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Thank you, guys. It's been a real joy to be with you.